Hello and welcome back to the Cosmic Enigma. Here we share real-life experiences of encounters with the unknown, stories that come from beyond the stars, crafted to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love seeing just how far this mystery reaches. Now find a comfortable spot, take a deep breath, and let yourself be carried away. Story 1. The scent of rain clung to the air as I stepped into the dim hallway, the soft patter against the windows a constant whisper. The polished floorboards gleamed, reflecting the muted glow from the single flickering bulb overhead. Everything seemed in its usual order until I noticed the door at the end of the hall, slightly ajar, casting an unusual shadow across the carpet. It beckoned me forward with an unsettling silence, a quiet invitation to uncover the truth hidden beyond the threshold. But that memory feels borrowed now, like something I watched rather than lived. The edges blur when I try to focus on what came after that door. There's a gap in my mind, a hollow space where something important should be. I know this because of how I feel when I wake up different, changed in ways I can't articulate. My reflection looks the same, but behind my eyes something has shifted. The confusion started 3 weeks ago. I'd been going through my usual routine when I found myself standing in my kitchen, holding a glass of water I didn't remember pouring. The taste was wrong, metallic, with an aftertaste like new plastic and cold blood. That's when I noticed the recording device on the counter, its red light blinking steadily. I'd never seen it before. The audio file contained 47 minutes of what sounded like breathing, punctuated by electronic static that shifted in frequency like someone adjusting a radio dial. In the background, barely audible, was my own voice saying words I couldn't quite make out. The quality was poor, as if recorded through layers of interference, but I recognized the cadence of my speech, even when the words remained elusive. I've been playing that recording every night since, hoping it might unlock whatever's trapped behind the fog in my mind. Sometimes, in the spaces between the static bursts, I hear other sounds, footsteps that don't match my own rhythm, a low humming that seems to come from multiple sources at once, and underneath it all, something that might be machinery or might be breathing. The first fragment came to me while listening to minute 32 of the recording. The static cleared for just a moment, and I heard my voice say something about lights. Suddenly I was back in that hallway, but this time I could see beyond the doorway. The room was filled with a pulsing white radiance that hurt to look at directly. The light moved in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, sweeping across surfaces I couldn't identify. In the recording, my past self was describing what I was seeing, but the words were garbled, as if spoken through water. I remember now that I wasn't alone. There were voices in that room not speaking to me, but around me as if I were invisible. They had a quality that suggested they weren't coming from human throats. The tones were too pure, too controlled, lacking the natural imperfections of breath and saliva and tongue. When I try to recall what they were saying, my head begins to ache in a very specific way, like pressure building behind my left eye. The recording device had been warm to the touch when I first found it, though it had supposedly been sitting on my counter all night. Now, whenever I hold it, it vibrates slightly in my palm, not consistently, but in irregular pulses that seem to respond to my heartbeat. The sensation is unsettling, as if the device is somehow alive, or at least more connected to me than any electronic object should be. I've started keeping a journal, hoping that writing might help me piece together what happened. But when I read back over my entries, some of them describe things I don't remember writing. There are details about the texture of walls that felt like skin, about shadows that moved independently of their sources, about the way the air itself seemed to thicken as I moved deeper into that room beyond the hallway. The second fragment hit me while I was reviewing these mysterious journal entries. I remembered the moment when all the lights went out, not just in the room, but everywhere, as if someone had thrown a switch that controlled every source of illumination in existence. In that absolute darkness, I became aware of a presence behind me, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the displacement of air when it moved. The thing about this presence was that it felt patient, as if it had been waiting for exactly this moment of blindness to reveal itself. In the darkness, I heard a sound that defied easy description. It was organic but artificial, like a recording of breathing played through speakers that couldn't quite handle the frequency range. The sound seemed to circle around me, sometimes close enough to stir the hair near my ears, sometimes distant enough to be almost inaudible. What disturbed me most was that the rhythm didn't match human respiration. The intervals were too long, too calculated. Since these fragments started returning, strange things have been happening in my present life. My reflection in mirrors sometimes appears to be looking in a slightly different direction than I am. The delay is subtle, maybe half a second, but noticeable enough to make me question what I'm seeing. I've tested this by moving quickly from side to side, and there's definitely a lag, as if the mirror is showing me something that happened moments before rather than what's happening now. The sounds from the recording have begun appearing in my daily life as well. I'll be washing dishes or reading a book when I hear that electronic static in the background, faint but unmistakable. When I try to locate the source, it stops immediately, leaving only the normal ambient sounds of my environment, but the silence that follows feels different, heavier, more attentive. I found something else yesterday, a small metal object tucked behind the books on my shelf. It's roughly cylindrical, about the size of a thumb, with a surface that seems to shift between matte and reflective depending on the angle. When I hold it up to the light, I can see what might be inscriptions, but they don't correspond to any writing system I recognize. The symbols seem to move slightly when I'm not looking directly at them, rearranging themselves into new configurations. This object triggers the strongest memories yet. I can see myself in that room beyond the hallway, but now I'm not alone. There are figures moving around me, tall, indistinct shapes that seem to be conducting some kind of examination. They're not touching me, but I can feel their attention like a physical weight. The white light I remembered earlier is coming from instruments they're holding, devices that pulse and hum with that same electronic breathing sound from my recording. What troubles me most about this memory is how clear it is. Unlike the other fragments, which feel hazy and uncertain, this vision has a crystalline quality that seems too vivid to be a normal recollection. I can see details that should be impossible: the internal structure of the walls, the way light bends around the figures, the precise frequency of the humming sounds. It's as if I'm remembering with senses I don't normally possess. The metal object has been growing warmer in my possession. At first I thought this was just the heat from my hands, but it maintains its temperature even when I set it down. Sometimes I wake up to find it next to my pillow, though I'm certain I left it on the dresser across the room. The surface has developed new markings, or perhaps the existing ones have become more pronounced. They seem to be forming a pattern, though I can't determine what it might represent. In my latest journal entry, written in handwriting I'm becoming less certain is my own, there's a description of the moment when one of the figures approached me directly. According to this account, it leaned down until its face was level with mine, though I couldn't make out any features in the shifting light. What I could perceive was its breath, if that's the right word, which carried that same scent of new plastic and cold blood that I tasted in the water. The entry goes on to describe how this figure placed something in my hand, presumably the metal object I found on my shelf. But according to my own written words, there was a moment of communication, not through speech, but through direct transfer of information. The content of this exchange remains frustratingly vague in my notes, described only as instructions for later and the way back when ready. I've been studying the recording more carefully, using audio software to isolate different frequency ranges. In the higher registers, almost beyond human hearing, there are patterns that repeat every few minutes. They sound like data transmission, not random noise, but organized information being sent and received. When I slow down these high-frequency sections and lower the pitch, they resolve into something that almost resembles music, if music could be composed by minds that understood harmony in fundamentally different ways. The most disturbing discovery came when I analyzed my own voice on the recording. In several sections, I appear to be responding to questions, but there are no audible questions on the tape. My responses are calm, cooperative, as if I'm participating willingly in some kind of interview or assessment. I hear myself providing information about my daily routines, my thought patterns, my memories of childhood. But the tone of my voice is subtly wrong, too steady, lacking the natural variations that come with genuine emotion or spontaneous thought. There's a section near the end of the recording where my voice takes on an almost mechanical quality, as if I'm reading from a script or repeating words that have been fed to me. I'm describing the layout of my house, the location of important documents, the names and contact information of people I know. It sounds like I'm creating a detailed inventory of my life, though I can't imagine why such information would be needed. The final clear fragment came to me while listening to this section of the tape. I remembered standing in that white-lit room, but now the examination was over. The figures had stepped back, and I could sense their satisfaction, as if they had completed their work successfully. One of them was holding a device that looked like a more complex version of the metal object now in my possession. Light pulsed between the two objects in a rhythm that reminded me of a heartbeat. In this memory, I understood that something had been taken from me and something else had been left behind. The removal felt like a gentle extraction, as if someone were carefully pulling threads from a tapestry without damaging the overall pattern. What remained was functionally identical to what had been there before, but subtly altered in ways that wouldn't become apparent until much later. The figures began to withdraw, their forms becoming less distinct as they moved away from the central light source. But before they disappeared entirely, one of them turned back toward me. Though I couldn't see its face, I felt its attention focus on me with an intensity that was almost physical. In that moment, I received what I can only describe as a promise that this was not an ending, but a preparation for something yet to come. As the memory fades, I'm left with the unsettling certainty that the experience in that room was not a single event, but part of an ongoing process. The metal object in my possession isn't just a memento or a clue, it's a tool, designed to facilitate something that hasn't happened yet. The changes I feel in myself, the gaps in my memory, the strange sensory experiences, they're all part of a larger transformation that's still underway. The recording ends with several minutes of silence, but it's not empty silence. There's a quality to it that suggests presence, as if someone or something is still there, waiting. When I listen to this section with headphones, I can almost feel breath on the back of my neck, and the metal object in my hand begins to vibrate more intensely, as if responding to some signal I can't perceive. I've come to realize that my investigation into these lost memories isn't really about recovering the past, it's about preparing for the future. Whatever happened in that room beyond the hallway was just the beginning of something larger. The fragments I've recovered aren't random recollections, but carefully preserved pieces of information, left behind like breadcrumbs to guide me when the next phase begins. The strangest part is that I'm no longer certain I want to remember everything. Some knowledge carries a weight that changes you just by possessing it, and I can feel that weight growing heavier with each recovered fragment. There are moments when I catch myself staring at the metal object, not trying to decipher its markings, but simply waiting for it to tell me what to do next. The rain has started again outside my window, the same gentle patter that I remember from that first night in the hallway. But now the sound seems less random, more like a signal or a countdown. The metal object is warm against my palm, its vibrations matching the rhythm of the raindrops, and somewhere in the static between frequencies, I can hear my own voice from the recording, asking a question I don't remember speaking. When will you need me to come back? Story 2. The entryway was unobstructed, displaying an unadulterated path into the main area. Initial observations found no discrepancies in the arrangement of personal effects or furniture. A linear sequence of footprints traversed the tile from the entrance to the dining area, pausing at the edge of the table. Yet the dust on the tabletop remained undisturbed. In the kitchen, all implements appeared orderly. A solitary plate resided in the drying rack, still damp. The refrigerator hummed consistently. However, the power meter recorded an outage during the night. The windows were latched securely. Inconsistencies were noted in the floor pattern, almost imperceptible unless closely examined, and the clock on the wall marked the hour precisely, yet the calendar had no date. That much I know, that much I can hold on to when everything else shifts like sand through my fingers. But there was a sound, always that sound. A low thrumming that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves, or maybe from inside my skull. I can't tell anymore. It wasn't mechanical, not exactly. More like breathing, but too slow, too deliberate. When I try to place it in time, in space, it slips away. Was it before I found the footprints? After? The sound carries the smell of copper pennies and ozone, sharp in my nostrils. Sometimes I wake up and taste metal on my tongue, and I know the sound has been playing in my dreams again. The feeling of being watched crawls up my spine like ice water. I remember standing in what I think was my living room, but the furniture looked wrong, arranged differently than I remembered, or maybe I was the one who was different. My shadow fell across the carpet in a way that didn't match the light coming through the windows. I turned around, expecting to see someone behind me, but there was only empty air that felt thick and charged. The sensation of eyes on me didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger. I couldn't tell if I was awake or if this was another one of those half-dreams where reality bends at the edges. My thoughts weren't my own. That's the only way I can describe it. Ideas would surface in my mind, complete and foreign, like someone else's voice speaking inside my head. I would think about checking the locks on the doors, but the thought came with knowledge I shouldn't have had about which lock was loose, which window frame was warped. I found myself moving through my own home like a stranger who somehow knew all its secrets. My hands would reach for light switches before I consciously decided to turn on the lights. I would walk toward rooms I hadn't planned to visit, my feet carrying me with purpose I didn't understand. The lights came in pulses, rapid stroboscopic flashes that turned everything into a series of still photographs. In one flash, the room was empty. In the next, shadows had shifted. In another, objects seemed to have moved slightly, just enough to notice. The flashing had no source I could identify. It wasn't coming from the lamps or the overhead fixtures. It was as if the air itself was blinking. During the darkness between flashes, I could hear that thrumming sound growing louder, more insistent. My skin tingled with static electricity. The metallic taste grew stronger. Something was happening to the space around me, something that my eyes could only catch in fragments. The headaches started afterward, not regular headaches, but a pressure behind my eyes that felt like expansion, like something trying to push outward from inside my skull. I would find myself standing in rooms with no memory of entering them. My reflection in mirrors looked slightly delayed, as if the image was struggling to keep up with my movements. Food tasted different, muted, as if my sense of taste had been wrapped in cotton. I started avoiding bright lights because they made the pressure worse. Sleep became elusive, and when it came, It brought dreams of walking through my house while someone else controlled my legs. But wait, the lights weren't strobing. They were steady, unwavering, but wrong in their intensity. Too bright for the fixtures they came from, casting shadows that fell in impossible directions. I remember now, or I think I do, the way the light seemed to bend around corners, illuminating spaces that should have been hidden. The thrumming sound was quieter then, almost gentle, like a lullaby hummed by something that didn't quite understand human melody. My skin felt warm instead of electric. The metallic taste was sweeter, almost pleasant. Which version is real? Which memory can I trust? They both feel equally vivid, equally false. I don't try to understand anymore. Understanding feels dangerous, like reaching towards something that might grab back. The footprints are still there in my kitchen, or in some kitchen that might be mine. The damp plate continues to dry in the rack, perpetually moist, perpetually clean. I've learned to live with the gaps in my memory, the spaces where logic should fit but doesn't. Some mornings I wake up with dirt under my fingernails, though I haven't been gardening. Some evenings I find my doors unlocked, though I remember securing them. The calendar still shows no date, and I've stopped trying to fill in that blank space. Time moves differently now, in loops and spirals rather than straight lines. I am changed, fundamentally altered in ways I can't name or measure. The only constant is the certainty that something happened, something that left me fractured and reassembled incorrectly. I don't want to remember any more than I already do. Some knowledge is too heavy for a human mind to carry. Story 3. It was the flicker of the light, a brief stutter that shouldn't have existed in this room. I stood by the doorway, the skin on my neck tightening as if anticipating a storm. The light pulsed again, too deliberate, too erratic, and for a moment the walls felt as if they were closing in, leaning ever so slightly. It reminded me of a hallway, one I couldn't quite place, where the lights would dance the same unsettling rhythm. The air felt thinner here, and I moved further in, drawn by an undertow of something I had been sure was long forgotten. What if this was not a trick of faulty wiring, but a signal? I hadn't realized how deeply the memory tugged until now. The light blinked once more, and with it came a certainty I'd been led here, and I needed to understand why. The nights have become impossible since then. I sit in my kitchen, watching the digital clock on the microwave reset itself to midnight over and over again. The numbers glow green, then fade to black, then return. Always midnight, always that same moment when everything stops making sense. I've unplugged it 17 times now. It keeps happening. My neighbors think I'm losing my mind. They smile with that careful politeness reserved for people who might snap at any moment. When I tried to explain about the humming that starts at exactly the same time each night, they nodded and suggested I see someone, a professional, someone who could help me process what they call stress, trauma, adjustment issues, but they weren't there. They didn't feel the ground pulse beneath their feet like a heartbeat too slow and too deep to belong to anything earthly. The humming comes from everywhere and nowhere. It seeps through the walls, rises from the floorboards, seems to emanate from inside my own skull. It's not mechanical, not electrical, though it makes every electronic device in my home behave strangely. The television turns itself on to channels that show only static. The radio picks up frequencies that sound like breathing, slow and deliberate, as if something vast is sleeping just beyond the range of normal hearing. I've started sleeping in different rooms, thinking location might matter. It doesn't. The sensation follows me, that feeling of being observed, studied, catalogued. Sometimes I catch myself standing at windows I don't remember approaching, staring out at the empty street with my hand pressed flat against the glass. The condensation from my breath creates patterns I don't recognize, symbols that fade before I can understand their meaning. The dreams are the worst part. I wake up with the taste of copper in my mouth and the certainty that I've been somewhere else. somewhere with corridors that stretch impossibly long and lights that pulse in sequences I almost comprehend. In these dreams, I'm walking towards something, or something is walking toward me. The perspective shifts without warning, and I can never tell which is true. But the dreams aren't really dreams, are they? They're memories trying to surface, fragments of something my mind has been desperately trying to forget. The more I resist, the stronger they become. The more I try to convince myself it was nothing, the more the evidence accumulates around me like sediment, building layers of undeniable truth. It started with the figure. That's what I keep coming back to, what my mind circles around like water spiraling down a drain. I was standing outside, looking up at a sky that seemed too close, too heavy, pressing down with the weight of something immense and patient. The stars were wrong that night, not missing, not rearranged, just wrong in a way that made my eyes water when I tried to focus on them. That's when I saw it, the shape moving against the darkness, too tall and too still to be human. It stood at the edge of my vision, just far enough away that I couldn't make out details, close enough that I could feel its attention like heat from a fire. When I turned my head to look directly, it was gone. When I looked away, it returned, always in my peripheral vision, always watching. I tried to convince myself it was a tree, a fence post, a trick of shadows and tired eyes. But trees don't move with that fluid, deliberate motion. Trees don't radiate that sense of ancient intelligence, of something that has been waiting far longer than any human lifetime. And trees don't leave behind that lingering sensation of being catalogued, examined, found somehow wanting or perhaps perfectly adequate for purposes I couldn't begin to imagine. The figure appeared 3 times that night, always in a different location, always maintaining that same careful distance. By the 3rd sighting, I understood it wasn't hiding from me. It was letting me see it, allowing me to become accustomed to its presence before something else happened, something I still can't quite grasp but feel approaching like a storm front moving across still water. Above the figure, the sky held something that shouldn't have been there. Not a star, not a planet, not any aircraft I could identify. It hung motionless, a point of light that pulsed with the same rhythm as the humming that would later invade my home. The light was wrong too, not white or yellow, but a color that seemed to exist just outside the normal spectrum, visible but impossible to name or describe to others. As I watched, the light grew larger or perhaps closer. The distinction became meaningless as my sense of scale and distance began to dissolve. What had seemed impossibly far away was suddenly, inexplicably near. What had been a point became a shape, angular and smooth simultaneously, defying the basic laws of how objects should appear in 3-dimensional space. The craft, because that's what it was, though I resist using the word, moved without sound, without disturbance to the air around it. It simply existed in one position and then another, as if the concept of movement was too primitive for its method of locomotion. Watching it was like trying to follow the minute hand of a clock, knowing it was moving, but never catching the moment of transition. But before the craft, before the figure, there were signs I missed or chose to ignore. The electrical disturbances started days earlier, subtle at first. The coffee maker would finish brewing before I turned it on. The bathroom light would be on when I woke up, though I was certain I'd switched it off. My phone would show calls I never made to numbers that didn't exist when I tried to call them back. I told myself these were normal glitches, the kind of minor malfunctions that happen in any home filled with electronic devices. But the pattern was too consistent, too purposeful. Every disturbance seemed designed to make me pay attention, to prepare me for something larger approaching, like ripples preceding a stone dropped in still water. The temperature changes were harder to dismiss. Rooms would become suddenly, inexplicably cold, not the gradual chill of winter seeping through inadequate insulation, but an immediate drop that made my breath visible and raised goosebumps along my arms. Then just as quickly, the warmth would return, leaving no trace except the memory of that piercing cold and the certainty that something had passed through the space I occupied. Objects began to vibrate, subtly at first, barely perceptible tremors in the water glass beside my bed, tiny ripples that appeared without cause and disappeared when I looked directly at them. The vibrations grew stronger over time, affecting larger objects. Picture frames would rattle against walls, books would slide slightly along shelves, and always that sense of something vast moving just beyond perception, causing these small disturbances like the wake of a ship passing in deep water. The smell came next, ozone, sharp and clean like the air after lightning, but also something else, something metallic and organic that I couldn't identify. It would appear without warning, fill a room for minutes or hours, then fade as mysteriously as it had arrived. The smell was strongest near windows and doorways, as if whatever carried it was moving past my home, pausing occasionally to investigate before continuing on its incomprehensible journey. I started losing time during those days. Not dramatic gaps, nothing as obvious as missing hours, just small discrepancies that accumulated like interest on an unpaid debt. I would begin a task and find it completed without memory of the intervening steps. I would sit down to read and discover the sun had moved across the sky while I held the same page open, the words swimming before my eyes like they were printed on water. My reflection began to look strange in mirrors and windows, not different exactly, but somehow disconnected, as if the person looking back was a fraction of a second behind my actual movements. I would raise my hand and watch the reflection follow a heartbeat later, creating a disorienting sense that I was watching myself from outside my own body. The nausea started as a faint queasiness, the kind of minor discomfort that could be attributed to poor sleep or irregular meals. But it grew more persistent, more specific. It would strike at particular moments in certain locations, always accompanied by that metallic taste and the growing certainty that I was being observed by something that found my biology fascinating and alien. Standing in my backyard one evening, I felt the ground pulse beneath my feet. A single deep throb that seemed to come from miles underground, as if the earth itself had a heartbeat I was only now learning to perceive. The pulse came again, slower than any human rhythm, patient and vast and utterly foreign. I pressed my palm against the soil and felt it again, that massive circulation of something that had been there long before I arrived and would remain long after I was gone. But even before these obvious signs, there was that first moment of recognition, so subtle I almost missed it entirely. I was standing in my garden, pulling weeds in the fading light of what seemed like an ordinary evening. The air was still, the temperature comfortable, everything exactly as it should be in a world where the impossible remained safely impossible. That's when I noticed the silence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of a silence so complete it seemed to have weight and texture. The birds had stopped singing, the insects had ceased their endless chorus, even the distant traffic had faded to nothing. The world held its breath, waiting for something to begin. I straightened up, my hands still dirty from the soil, and looked around at a landscape that appeared unchanged but felt fundamentally different. The familiar had become foreign, as if I was seeing my own backyard through eyes that belonged to someone else, someone who understood that what was about to happen had been inevitable from the moment I chose to live in this place, to be alone under this particular patch of sky. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and amber that seemed too vivid, too saturated, as if reality itself had been enhanced beyond its normal parameters. I should have gone inside then. I should have recognized the warning signs and retreated to the false safety of walls and locked doors. Instead, I remained standing there, waiting without knowing what I was waiting for, as the last light faded and the first stars appeared in a sky that would soon hold something that had no business being there. That was the moment it all began, though I understand now it had been building toward this for longer than I could possibly comprehend. Something had been watching, waiting, choosing the perfect moment to make its presence known to someone who would be isolated enough to experience it fully and powerless enough to be unable to prove it to anyone else. The silence stretched on, and in that perfect quiet, I felt the first faint vibration in the ground beneath my feet, the first hint of the humming that would later fill my nights, the first whisper of something vast and patient turning its attention toward the small, fragile figure standing alone in a garden, as darkness fell around me like a curtain being drawn. Story 4. The air pressed gently against my skin, warm yet indifferent, as if it were merely pretending to exist. Colors whispered softly inside closed spaces where no walls stood, vibrating with an almost imperceptible hum. My fingertips brushed against a surface that pulsed beneath them, alive and aware. Every inhale felt measured, not entirely my own, each exhale an alien rhythm. Shadows shifted in places they shouldn't, cast by no source I could see. Silent eyes, unseen yet certain, weighed on my consciousness, probing beneath the thin veneer of my understanding. I knew I was there, wherever there was, and yet something or someone kept my presence at bay. That metallic taste returns without warning, coating my tongue like copper pennies left in rain. It arrives with a sound I can't place, a low frequency that makes my teeth ache. The sound doesn't come from outside or inside, but from somewhere between. I press my palms against my ears, but it only grows stronger, resonating through my bones. There's ozone in the air, sharp and electric, the way it smells right before lightning strikes. But there's no storm, no clouds, just that persistent buzzing that seems to originate from the walls themselves. My nose twitches. The scent is wrong, too clean, antiseptic mixed with something organic and warm, like heated metal touching flesh. I'm not alone in this room. I know this with the same certainty I know my own heartbeat, though I can't see anyone. The presence hovers just beyond my peripheral vision, patient and watchful. When I turn my head, the feeling shifts but never disappears. It's like being studied by something that understands me better than I understand myself. My skin prickles with awareness, tiny hairs standing at attention along my arms and neck. The air moves differently when it's near, becomes thicker, more deliberate. I hold my breath, listening for footsteps that never come, for breathing that might not be my own. The silence stretches, but it's not empty. It's full of intention, heavy with purpose I can't grasp. My thoughts feel borrowed. They arrive fully formed, ideas that taste foreign in my mind. I think about going home, but I don't remember leaving. I think about calling for help, but my voice belongs to someone else. The words that form behind my lips aren't mine, syllables that feel wrong in my mouth. I try to focus on simple things, counting backwards from 10, but the numbers rearrange themselves. 7 comes after 3, 12 appears where 5 should be. My internal compass spins wildly, pointing to magnetic north that doesn't exist. Even my memories feel edited, important details smudged like wet ink. I remember having breakfast, but not what I ate. I remember driving, but not where I was going. The light changes everything. It doesn't illuminate, it penetrates, seeping through my closed eyelids like liquid fire. The brightness has weight, pressing down on my shoulders, forcing me to my knees. Objects in the room cast shadows upward, defying physics in ways that make my stomach lurch. I see shapes that shouldn't exist, geometric forms that hurt to look at directly. Something moves in my peripheral vision, too fast to track, too large to ignore. The air shimmers with heat distortion, though I feel cold. My hands reach out involuntarily, grasping at nothing, fingers closing around empty space that feels solid. The silence is absolute now, as if sound itself has been erased. Even my heartbeat disappears into the void. The headache started after, not pain exactly, but pressure, like my skull is too small for what's inside. I find myself staring at ordinary objects, faucets and doorknobs and light switches, wondering if they've always looked that way. My reflection in mirrors seems delayed, a fraction of a second behind my movements. Food tastes different, colors appear muted, textures feel wrong against my fingertips. I catch myself holding my breath without realizing it, as if breathing has become a conscious choice rather than an automatic function. At night, I wake with the certainty that I've been somewhere else, though I never remember leaving my bed. There's dirt under my fingernails that wasn't there before sleep. My clothes smell like ozone. But maybe the light was different. Maybe it was soft, almost gentle, wrapping around me like warm water. Maybe I wasn't kneeling but standing, arms outstretched in welcome rather than defense. The shadows fell naturally, pooling in expected corners, behaving as shadows should. The shapes I saw were familiar, comforting even, like old friends returning after a long absence. The air didn't shimmer with heat, but with something else, something that made me feel less alone than I'd ever felt before. My hands didn't grasp at nothing, but held something precious, something that filled the empty spaces inside me. The silence wasn't void, but full, pregnant with understanding that transcended words. My heartbeat synchronized with something larger, more encompassing than my small existence. I've stopped trying to make sense of it. The fragments don't fit together the way they should, and forcing them only makes the headaches worse. Sometimes I catch myself mid-sentence, unsure if I'm speaking to someone or if someone is speaking through me. The metallic taste comes and goes now, a familiar companion that no longer frightens me. I've learned to live with the presence, to accept its patient watching without turning to look. My borrowed thoughts have become indistinguishable from my own, and maybe that's how it was always meant to be. The light still changes, the shadows still misbehave, but I no longer question what I see. Some experiences exist beyond explanation, beyond memory, beyond the small boundaries of what we think we know. I am different now, fundamentally altered in ways I can't name, and perhaps that's enough. Perhaps forgetting is its own kind of mercy. Story 5. The handle turned with a whisper, yet the door remained shut. My steps left no trace on the carpet, yet a faint impression lingered, an echo of a presence that felt misplaced. The aroma of freshly ground coffee hung heavy, though the pot had been empty for days. Outside the window, the light flickered as though unsure which moment to belong to, leaving my reflection to dance between shadows. When I reached for the glass, the water within rippled, responding to a touch it hadn't received. I'm trying to remember what happened. The memories come in pieces, like broken glass catching light at different angles. Some fragments are so sharp they cut through everything else. Others are smooth, worn down by repetition until they feel more like dreams than actual moments. The coffee smell, that's where it always starts. I can taste it on my tongue even now, bitter and thick, coating my throat, but I haven't touched coffee in weeks. The doctor said caffeine might interfere with the healing process. What healing process? I never asked. The words felt too heavy in my mouth. There's a humming sound that follows me, not always. Sometimes it hides behind other noises, the refrigerator cycling on, the air conditioning unit outside my bedroom window. But when everything goes quiet, when the world holds its breath, I can hear it pulsing, like a heartbeat that doesn't belong to me. I remember standing in the kitchen. The tiles were cold under my bare feet, and I was holding something in my hand, a key maybe, or a coin. My fingers were trembling, and there was this pressure behind my eyes, like someone was pressing their thumbs against my temples from the inside. The window above the sink showed nothing but gray sky, but I kept staring at it, waiting for something to change. The reflection in the glass moved wrong. I know that sounds impossible, but impossible things feel normal now. When I lifted my hand, the reflection hesitated for just a moment before following. When I turned my head, the reflected face lingered, looking straight ahead with eyes that seemed too wide, too knowing. Sometimes I find myself in rooms I don't remember entering. The living room with its beige walls and the couch that sags in the middle. I'll be sitting there and my skin will be damp with sweat, and there's this metallic taste in my mouth like I've been biting my tongue. The television is always off, but the screen reflects the room behind me, and sometimes there are shapes in that reflection that don't match what's actually there. The footsteps, they echo in my head at the strangest moments. Not my footsteps, someone else's, heavier, more deliberate. They have a rhythm to them, like a song I almost recognize but can't quite place. Sometimes I catch myself walking in time with them, my bare feet against the hardwood floor, trying to match that cadence that exists only in my memory. There was a door, I'm certain of this, even though the details shift every time I try to focus on them. Sometimes it's painted white, sometimes it's natural wood with deep grain lines that look like scars. The handle is always brass, always warm to the touch as if someone has just been holding it. Behind that door there's a light that seeps out around the edges, yellow and flickering like candlelight, but steadier somehow. I never opened that door, or maybe I did. The memory fractures right at that moment, splitting into possibilities that feel equally real and equally false. In one version, I turn the handle and the door swings open to reveal nothing but darkness. In another, the door opens by itself, and the light pours out so bright it burns away everything else. In a third, I stand there forever, my hand on the handle, unable to choose. The smell of metal comes back to me in waves, not just any metal, something specific, like the taste you get when you put a battery on your tongue, sharp and electric. It clings to the inside of my nose, and no amount of breathing through my mouth makes it go away. Sometimes it's so strong I can feel it coating my teeth. My hands shake when I try to write this down. The pen feels foreign between my fingers, like I'm learning to hold it for the first time. The words come out crooked, letters overlapping and running together. When I look back at what I've written, sometimes the sentences don't match what I remember thinking, as if my hand is writing one story while my mind tells another. There was someone else there, I'm almost sure of it, not in the room with me, but nearby. Close enough that I could feel their presence like heat from a fire. Their breathing was different from mine, deeper and slower, as if they were sleeping or concentrating very hard on something. Sometimes I would hold my breath just to hear theirs more clearly, but the silence that followed felt dangerous, like I was eavesdropping on something I wasn't supposed to hear. The carpet in the hallway has a stain shaped like a hand. I noticed it one morning when I was walking to the bathroom, and it stopped me cold. The stain is dark, almost black, and it's positioned right where someone might put their palm if they were crawling or if they had fallen and were trying to push themselves up. I've scrubbed at it with everything I can find, but it never gets lighter. If anything, it seems to spread, the edges becoming more defined each time I look. Water behaves strangely around me now. Not just the glass by the window, though that's where I first noticed it. When I run the faucet, the stream sometimes bends in directions that don't follow gravity. When I take a shower, the droplets on the glass door form patterns that look almost like letters, like someone is trying to write messages in the condensation. I've tried to read them, but they fade too quickly, leaving only the impression that they were important. The vibration under my feet happens most often late at night. It's subtle, like a truck passing on a distant highway, but it goes on too long and follows no pattern. Sometimes it feels like it's coming from directly below me, as if there's something large moving underneath the foundation of the house. Other times it seems to originate from my own body, as if my bones are humming at a frequency I can't control. I keep finding things in my pockets that I don't remember putting there. Small objects mostly. A button that doesn't match any of my clothes. A piece of paper folded so many times it's become a hard square, but when I unfold it, it's blank. A small stone that's warm to the touch and has a smooth depression in its center, as if someone has been rubbing their thumb against it for years. The light outside my window flickers in patterns. I've started keeping track, writing down the sequences, trying to find meaning in the rhythm. Short flash, long flash, pause. 3 short flashes, pause. Long flash, short flash, long flash. It reminds me of something I learned once, but the knowledge stays just out of reach, like a word on the tip of my tongue that never quite forms. My reflection has started appearing in places where there shouldn't be reflections. The surface of my coffee mug when it's empty, the black screen of my phone when it's turned off, the surface of the water in the toilet bowl. Always the same expression, eyes slightly wider than they should be, mouth not quite closed, as if I'm perpetually on the verge of saying something important. There's a pressure in my chest that comes and goes without warning. Not pain exactly, but a heaviness, like someone has placed a weight on my sternum and forgotten to remove it. When it happens, my breathing becomes shallow, and I have to concentrate on each inhale and exhale. During these episodes, the humming in my head gets louder, and sometimes I can feel it resonating in my ribs. I dream of corridors that stretch longer than they should. The walls are painted institutional green, and the fluorescent lights overhead flicker in the same pattern as the light outside my window. My footsteps echo in these dreams, but they're accompanied by other sounds, doors closing in the distance, the squeak of wheels that need oil, voices speaking just quietly enough that I can't make out the words. The handle on that door, the one I may or may not have opened, sometimes appears on other doors throughout the house. I'll reach for the bathroom door, and for just a moment the handle feels wrong under my palm. Too warm, too smooth, as if it's been worn down by countless hands. When I look directly at it, it's just a normal door handle, but the sensation lingers on my skin. Time moves differently now. I'll sit down to eat breakfast, and suddenly it's dark outside. I'll lie down for what feels like hours, staring at the ceiling, but when I check the clock, only minutes have passed. Sometimes I find evidence of activities I don't remember doing. Dishes washed and put away, books moved to different shelves, windows opened that I'm certain were closed. The taste of copper fills my mouth at random moments. It's strongest when I first wake up, coating my tongue and the roof of my mouth. I've checked for cuts, for bleeding, but my mouth appears normal. The taste fades gradually throughout the morning, but it never disappears completely. It's always there, lurking underneath whatever else I eat or drink. My shadow falls in directions that don't match the light sources. I first noticed this while standing in the kitchen with the overhead light directly above me. My shadow should have been a small pool at my feet, but instead it stretched long and thin toward the hallway, as if there were a bright light shining from that direction. When I turned to look, the hallway was dark. There are moments when I feel like I'm being watched, but not from outside. The sensation comes from within, as if there's another consciousness sharing space behind my eyes, observing everything I do with detached interest. During these times, my own thoughts feel foreign, like I'm overhearing someone else's internal monologue. The air in certain rooms becomes thick and hard to breathe. It happens most often in the bedroom, usually just before I fall asleep. The atmosphere grows heavy, pressing down on me like a blanket that's too warm and too dense. My lungs have to work harder to extract oxygen, and sometimes I wake up gasping as if I've been holding my breath for too long. I've started noticing sounds that don't have sources. A door closing when all the doors are already closed. Footsteps in the attic when there's no attic access. The sound of running water when all the faucets are turned off. These sounds are always brief, lasting just long enough for me to register them before they stop, leaving me wondering if I imagined them. The patterns in the wood grain of my dresser have begun to look like faces. Not human faces exactly, but expressions nonetheless. Sometimes they appear concerned, other times curious. One knot in particular seems to be watching me, following my movements around the room. When I approach it directly, it's just a knot in the wood, but in my peripheral vision, it becomes something more. My handwriting has been changing. The letters slant differently, the loops are tighter, and sometimes I form words in ways I've never formed them before. It's subtle, but when I compare recent writing to older samples, the differences are unmistakable. It's as if someone else has been guiding my hand, teaching it new habits. The memory of that door keeps returning, more vivid each time. I can feel the brass handle warming under my palm, can hear the soft click of the mechanism as I turn it. There's something urgent about the memory, as if it contains information I desperately need. But every time I try to push deeper to remember what happened next, the details scatter like startled birds. Sometimes I find myself standing in the middle of rooms with no memory of how I got there. I'll be holding something, a book or a glass of water, and I'll have no recollection of picking it up. These gaps in memory are becoming more frequent, lasting longer each time. It's like someone is editing my life, cutting out scenes and leaving only the transitions. The humming has gotten stronger. It's not just in my head anymore. I can feel it in my chest, in my bones, resonating through my entire body like I'm a tuning fork that's been struck. Sometimes it's so intense that I have to sit down and wait for it to pass. Other times it's barely noticeable, a background vibration that I only notice when everything else goes quiet. There's something I'm not remembering, something important. It hovers at the edge of my consciousness like a storm cloud on the horizon, dark and full of potential energy. I can feel it pressing against the barriers in my mind, trying to break through. Part of me wants to remember, needs to remember. But another part, a deeper part, is terrified of what that memory might contain. The reflection in the water glass has started moving independently. Not dramatically, just small gestures that don't match my own movements, a slight turn of the head, a blink that comes a fraction of a second too late, the mouth opening as if to speak, though no sound comes out. When I move the glass, the reflection follows, but there's always that slight delay, that moment of hesitation that shouldn't exist. I'm writing this down because I need to remember, or maybe because I need to forget. The distinction has become blurred like everything else in my life. The words feel important as I write them, but when I read them back, they seem to describe someone else's experience. Someone else's confusion and fear and growing certainty that something fundamental has changed. The door is calling to me again. I can feel its presence even though I can't see it, can't locate it in any of the rooms I've searched. The brass handle is warm with anticipation, waiting for my touch. Behind the door, that steady light continues to flicker, and I know that whatever answers I'm seeking lie in that glow. But I'm not ready, not yet. The memories are still too fragmented, too dangerous. They're growing stronger though, becoming more insistent. Soon I won't be able to resist them anymore. Soon the door will open, whether I want it to or not, and I'll finally understand what happened to me. What's still happening to me? The humming is getting louder now, and my reflection is starting to smile. Story 6. The aroma of freshly baked bread filled the air as sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, casting gentle patterns on the floor. Yet an unsettling stillness lingered. The clock on the wall ticked in rhythm, and the breeze from the open window played with the curtains, but there was an unfamiliar tension beneath the surface. A half-open drawer caught the eye, its contents disturbed as if by a restless hand. The house seemed to hold its breath, listening, waiting for something or someone who should not be there. I tell myself it was just a dream. The first one always feels the simplest, the most ordinary. I was lying in my bed, the familiar weight of blankets around me, when I noticed the light. Not harsh, not bright, just an oval glow hovering somewhere above, pulsing gently like slow breathing. The room felt different, stretched somehow, as if the walls had moved back a few inches while I wasn't looking. There was a sound, too, a low hum, constant and even, like electricity running through wires hidden in the walls. I remember thinking it was the refrigerator downstairs, or maybe the heating system cycling on. These old houses make all kinds of noises, but the hum seemed to come from everywhere at once, wrapping around me like a blanket of static. I tried to move, to roll over and ignore it, but my body felt heavy, disconnected. Not paralyzed exactly, just unresponsive, like trying to move through thick honey. The oval light pulsed once, twice, and then I was awake, really awake, staring at my ceiling in the pre-dawn darkness. Just stress, I told myself. Work had been demanding lately, and I'd been sleeping poorly. The mind creates strange theaters when it's tired. But the dream came back. The second time I was ready for it. The same bed, the same heavy feeling in my limbs, but now the details were sharper, more insistent. The oval light was there again, but this time I could see it moving, drifting slowly from left to right above me like a searchlight scanning. The hum was louder too, and underneath it, something else. A voice maybe, but too distorted to understand. Metallic syllables that seemed to bend around themselves, creating meaning just beyond my comprehension. The room stretched further this time. The walls breathed outward until I couldn't see them anymore, leaving me floating in a space that felt both infinite and claustrophobic. The air tasted different, sharp and clean, like the moment after lightning strikes, but artificial somehow, processed. I felt myself being lifted, though no part of my body actually moved. It was as if gravity had simply decided I belonged somewhere else, and I was rising toward that pulsing oval light. The metallic voice grew clearer, more urgent, but still incomprehensible. Words that might have been instructions or questions or warnings. Then I was awake again, gasping in my own bed, my heart racing like I'd been running. The taste lingered in my mouth, that clean, electric flavor that had no business being there. I started noticing things during the day, small things easily dismissed. The kitchen drawer was open when I came downstairs for coffee, though I was certain I'd closed it the night before. Inside, the utensils were arranged differently, as if someone had been searching through them with careful, unfamiliar hands. There was a mark on my arm too, a small red circle just above my wrist. It didn't hurt, didn't itch, just sat there like a tiny brand. I couldn't remember bumping into anything, couldn't think of what might have caused it. Probably an insect bite, or maybe I'd scraped against something in my sleep. The radio in my car started acting strange, picking up fragments of conversations that didn't belong to any station I knew. Voices speaking in that same metallic cadence I'd heard in the dream, just distorted enough that I couldn't quite make out the words. When I tried to tune to a clearer frequency, the voices would fade, leaving only static. I told myself these were coincidences. The mind is remarkable at finding patterns where none exist, at connecting unrelated events into meaningful narratives. I'd been thinking about the dreams, so naturally I was more sensitive to anything that seemed even remotely connected. But the third dream changed everything. This time the experience felt more real than reality itself. The colors were more vivid, the sensations more immediate. I could feel the texture of the air against my skin, could taste that electric sharpness with perfect clarity. The oval light was brighter now, and I could see details within it, geometric patterns that shifted and pulsed in rhythm with a constant hum. The metallic voice was speaking directly to me now, and though I still couldn't understand the words, I somehow grasped their meaning. Questions about my health, my memories, my understanding of what was happening. I tried to answer, but my voice came out as that same distorted, metallic sound. Time moved strangely in this space. I felt like I was there for hours, being examined, measured, catalogued. Gentle pressures against my skin, lights that moved across my vision in precise patterns. The sensation of being carefully, methodically studied. But when I woke up, only minutes had passed. The bedside lamp was on, though I never remembered turning it on. The taste in my mouth was stronger now, and the red mark on my arm had been joined by two others, forming a perfect triangle just below my elbow. The boundaries began to blur after that. I'd be sitting at my desk, working on something mundane, when I'd hear that familiar hum coming from the walls around me. The fluorescent lights overhead would flicker in that same slow, breathing rhythm. I'd look up and see the oval glow reflected in my computer screen, even though there was nothing behind me that could cast such a reflection. Conversations became difficult. People would ask me simple questions, and I'd find myself answering in words that felt foreign in my mouth, syllables that didn't quite fit together the way they should. My voice sounded metallic to my own ears, processed and strange. I started losing time. I'd sit down to read the morning paper and suddenly find myself standing in the kitchen with no memory of how I'd gotten there. The bread would be baking in the oven, filling the air with that familiar aroma, but I had no recollection of mixing the dough or setting the timer. The house felt different too. Rooms seemed larger at night, their walls breathing outward just like in the dreams. I'd walk down the hallway and count more steps than should have been possible. Doorways led to spaces that were subtly wrong, as if someone had rebuilt them from imperfect memories. The marks on my arm multiplied, small red circles appearing overnight in neat geometric patterns. They didn't hurt, didn't fade, just accumulated like a growing constellation mapped across my skin. I tried covering them with long sleeves, but I could feel them there, warm and present, reminding me of something I couldn't quite remember. I began to suspect that they weren't dreams at all. The realization crept in slowly, like water seeping through a crack in a dam. The consistency was too perfect, the details too precise. Dreams fade and shift when you try to remember them, but these experiences remained crystal clear, each sensation catalogued with scientific precision. Something had happened to me, something was still happening. The memories were there, filed away in some locked corner of my mind, but I could only access them in fragments, in the spaces between sleeping and waking when my defenses were down. The metallic voices weren't dream voices, they were recordings, echoes of conversations I'd actually had. The oval light wasn't a symbol created by my unconscious mind, it was something I'd seen, something that had seen me in return. The house knew too. I could feel it watching me, waiting for me to understand. The kitchen drawer opened itself because someone had taught it to expect visitors. The bread baked itself because someone had programmed the routine into my hands, my movements, my daily patterns. I was living in the aftermath of something I couldn't remember, following scripts I'd never consciously learned. Last night I had the dream again. The same bed, the same heavy feeling in my limbs, the same oval light pulsing above me. But this time, as I felt myself being lifted toward that geometric glow, I reached out with my hand. My fingers touched something solid, something real. And when I woke up this morning, there was a piece of metal in my palm that had never existed in any dream, warm and humming with a frequency I recognized but couldn't name. The kitchen drawer is open again, the bread is baking. The light patterns dance across the floor exactly as they always have. But now I know I'm not dreaming. Now I know I never was Story 7. The tap lingered too long, a drop suspended mid-fall, refusing to join the rest. My fingers skimmed the surface of the countertop, a fine layer of dust clinging where it shouldn't be. Each touch offered misplaced resistance. Drawers hesitated, doors leaned slightly ajar as if breath held them. Light filtered through the blinds, but the rays were muted, bent, and reshaping the room in unfamiliar hues. The rug underfoot was steadfastly anchored, though I remembered distinctly leaving it askew. A whisper of settling wood, not from beneath, but above, as though the ceiling itself exhaled. A misplaced shiver, a pattern broken and no presence to own it. The first dream came on a Tuesday, though I only remember that because I'd fallen asleep reading about sleep patterns. Ironic, maybe. The dream was simple. I was lying in my bed exactly as I had been, but there was a light, not harsh, not intrusive, just a soft, oval glow hovering somewhere above the foot of the bed. It pulsed gently like breathing, and I watched it with the kind of detached curiosity you only have in dreams. When I woke, I attributed it to stress. Work had been demanding, my mind overactive. The light was probably just the reflection of a passing car, filtered through my subconscious. I went about my morning routine. Coffee tasted normal. The shower ran at the right temperature. Everything felt exactly as it should, except for a lingering sense that something had shifted during the night. Nothing I could name, just a feeling like walking into a room and knowing someone had been there moments before. The second dream came 3 nights later. I was in the same position, lying on my back, but this time the light was closer. Close enough that I could see it wasn't quite round, more oval, with edges that seemed to breathe. The pulsing was more pronounced, and there was a sound now. A low hum, constant and rhythmic, like someone was modulating a frequency only I could hear. The sound felt familiar, though I couldn't place where I might have heard it before. In the dream, I tried to sit up, but my body wouldn't respond. Not paralyzed exactly, more like I was gently held in place by invisible hands. The light moved then, drifting slowly from the foot of the bed toward my left side. As it moved, the humming grew louder, and I heard something else underneath it, a voice maybe, but too distorted to understand. The words, if they were words, felt important, like someone was trying to tell me something I desperately needed to know. I woke with my heart racing, though not from fear. It was more like the sensation you get when you almost remember something crucial, but it slips away just as you reach for it. The room looked exactly as it always did, but the air felt different, thicker somehow. I opened the window to let in fresh air, but even the breeze carried that strange weight. During the day, I found myself noticing things, small things. The coffee mug I'd left on the kitchen counter was turned slightly, handle facing a different direction than I remembered. The book I'd been reading was closed, though I was certain I'd left it open. These could have been simple lapses in memory, but they felt deliberate, purposeful. When I checked my phone, there was a missed call from a number I didn't recognize. No voicemail, just the record of the call at 3:17 a.m. I stared at the screen, trying to remember if I'd heard the phone ring during the night. I hadn't, but something about the number looked familiar. The digits seemed to form a pattern I should know, like a song I'd heard but couldn't quite hum. The third dream was different, longer, more vivid than any dream I'd ever had. I was lying in bed again, but this time I could feel the weight of the mattress beneath me, the texture of the sheets against my skin. Every sensation was amplified, more real than reality itself. The oval light was there immediately, positioned directly above my chest, close enough that I should have felt heat from it, but there was only a cool, artificial warmth. The humming was louder now, and underneath it, that voice was clearer. Still distorted, but I could make out individual sounds. It wasn't speaking any language I recognized, yet somehow I understood the tone, patient, instructional, like someone explaining something they'd explained many times before. The voice had a metallic quality, as if it were being filtered through some kind of device. In the dream, I felt myself being lifted, though no part of my body actually moved. It was the strangest sensation, a complete disconnect between what I felt and what I observed. I could see myself lying motionless on the bed while simultaneously experiencing the sensation of floating upward toward the light. The room around me began to fade, walls dissolving into a soft, gray mist. Time moved strangely. Minutes felt like hours, then suddenly everything would skip forward like a film with missing frames. I found myself in different positions, sometimes sitting, sometimes standing in what looked like my bedroom but wasn't quite right. The furniture was the same but arranged differently. The window was on the wrong wall. The door opened inward instead of outward. Throughout it all there was a presence, not visible but undeniably there, watching, waiting. The feeling was so strong that I kept trying to turn my head to see who was behind me, but in the dream I could never quite manage it. Every time I thought I was about to see, something would distract me. The light would pulse brighter, the humming would shift pitch, or that metallic voice would speak again. I woke to find myself sitting upright in bed, fully alert as if I hadn't been sleeping at all. The room was exactly as it should be, but there was a smell lingering in the air. Sharp and clean, like ozone after a storm, but more artificial, chemical almost. I got up and walked through the apartment, checking windows, looking for the source, but found nothing. The smell faded gradually, but it left behind that same sense of displacement I'd been feeling. That morning I noticed the small circular bruise on my upper arm, perfectly round, about the size of a quarter, with no memory of how it had gotten there. It didn't hurt when I pressed it, but the skin felt slightly numb, like it had been touched by something very cold. I tried to remember bumping into anything, falling, any explanation for the mark, but came up empty. The missed calls continued, always the same number, always in the early morning hours, always with no voicemail. When I finally tried calling back, I got a message saying the number was not in service. But the calls kept coming, night after night, each one logged on my phone at precisely 3:17 a.m. My sleep became fitful. Even when I wasn't having the dream, I would wake multiple times throughout the night with the feeling that someone was in the room with me. I'd lie perfectly still, listening, but heard only the normal sounds of the building settling, the hum of the refrigerator, distant traffic. Still, the feeling persisted. I started leaving a light on, then realized that made it worse. The shadows seemed more defined, more purposeful. The fourth dream was the most vivid yet. I was aware I was dreaming, but that awareness didn't diminish the reality of the experience. If anything, it made everything sharper, more intense. The oval light was there immediately, but now there were other smaller lights arranged in a pattern I couldn't quite comprehend. They moved independently, sometimes in sync, creating shapes that felt significant but remained just beyond understanding. The metallic voice was clearer now, and I realized it was speaking to me directly, not at me but to me, as if continuing a conversation we'd been having for a long time. The words still weren't in any language I recognized, but the meaning was starting to penetrate. Instructions, I thought, or maybe reminders. The tone was patient but urgent, like someone trying to help me remember something crucial I'd forgotten. In the dream, I could move more freely. I sat up, stood, walked around the room, but the room kept changing. Sometimes it was my bedroom, sometimes somewhere else entirely. The walls would shift from familiar drywall to smooth, curved surfaces that seemed to glow with their own light. The ceiling would disappear, revealing what looked like a vast, dark space filled with distant points of light that weren't quite stars. I found myself having conversations, though I couldn't see who I was talking to. My voice sounded strange, muffled, as if I were speaking through water. I asked questions: where am I? What do you want? Why can't I remember? But the answers came not in words, but in sensations. Waves of understanding that felt true in the moment, but dissolved when I tried to hold on to them. The presence was stronger in this dream, multiple presences actually moving around me with purpose. I could feel them even when I couldn't see them, sense their attention like weight on my skin. They weren't threatening exactly, but they were insistent. There was something they needed me to understand, something important that I kept almost grasping before it slipped away. When I woke, I was standing in the middle of my living room, barefoot on the cold hardwood floor. I had no memory of getting out of bed, no recollection of walking there. The digital display on the microwave read 3:17 a.m. As I stood there, disoriented and shivering, my phone began to ring. The same unknown number, the same time, but this time I answered. Silence, not dead air, but a living silence filled with subtle sounds, distant humming, soft mechanical noises, something that might have been breathing. I said hello several times, but got no response. Just before I hung up, I heard something that made my blood freeze. My own voice, faint and distorted, saying words I didn't remember speaking. I understand now. I remember. The line went dead. The boundaries began to blur after that. I'd be sitting at my desk during the day and hear that familiar humming, so faint I couldn't be sure it was real. I'd catch glimpses of light in my peripheral vision, that same oval glow, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. Conversations would feel incomplete, as if I were responding to things people hadn't said, or failing to respond to things they had. Time became unreliable. I'd sit down to eat breakfast, and suddenly it would be afternoon. I'd start reading a book and find myself hours later with no memory of the pages in between. My phone would show missed calls and text messages I didn't remember receiving, responses I didn't remember sending. The circular bruises appeared more frequently, always perfectly round, always in slightly different locations. Upper arm, shoulder blade, the back of my neck, they never hurt, but the numbness was spreading. Sometimes I'd touch something and not feel it properly, as if there were a thin barrier between my skin and the world. Sleep and waking began to merge. I'd close my eyes and immediately be in the dream, or I'd think I was dreaming and realize I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. The oval light appeared during the day now, visible even in bright sunlight, hovering in corners or drifting slowly across rooms. Other people didn't seem to see it, but I began to wonder if they were seeing other things I couldn't perceive. The metallic voice started speaking during my waking hours, quiet, almost subliminal, but definitely there. It would comment on things I was doing, remind me of things I needed to remember, ask questions I couldn't quite answer. The language was becoming clearer, or maybe I was learning to understand it. The words felt familiar now, like a dialect of something I'd once known fluently. I started finding objects in my apartment that I didn't remember owning. Small things, a smooth, metallic disc about the size of a coaster, a piece of what looked like circuit board with patterns too complex to follow, a small cylinder that hummed softly when I held it. They appeared in drawers I rarely opened, on shelves I seldom used, always in places where they looked like they belonged. The dreams, if they were still dreams, became longer and more complex. I was no longer just lying in bed, but actively participating in activities I couldn't quite remember afterward. There were procedures, examinations, conversations that felt important but faded like smoke when I tried to recall them. I began to recognize the other presences, not visually but by their feel, their particular attention patterns. They knew me, had known me for a long time. One morning I woke to find words written on the bathroom mirror in what looked like condensation, though the room was dry. The letters were in an alphabet I didn't recognize, but somehow I could read them. The integration is nearly complete. As I stared, the words faded, leaving no trace they'd ever been there. My reflection looked different lately, not dramatically, but in subtle ways that were hard to define. My eyes seemed slightly larger, more reflective. My skin had a faint luminescence that was only visible in certain light. When I smiled, there was something behind the expression that felt foreign, as if someone else were learning to use my face. The phone calls changed. Instead of silence, I began to hear my own voice having conversations I didn't remember, discussing technical details I didn't understand, confirming appointments I hadn't made, agreeing to procedures I couldn't recall. The voice was definitely mine, but the cadence was slightly off, the vocabulary more precise than I normally used. I started staying awake deliberately, fighting sleep, but it didn't matter. The experiences continued regardless of my consciousness state. I'd be washing dishes and suddenly find myself in that other place, the room that looked like mine but wasn't, surrounded by presences that felt more real than my own body. The transitions became seamless, unnoticeable until they were already complete. The circular marks were no longer bruises, but seemed to be changing into something else. The skin was becoming smoother, almost metallic in texture. When I pressed them, they felt warm and seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. Sometimes, late at night, I could swear I heard faint sounds coming from them, whispers, electronic chirps, the distant hum that had become the soundtrack of my existence. Last night, though I'm no longer certain what constitutes night or day, I had the dream again. The same dream that started everything, with the oval light hovering above my bed. But this time, as I watched it pulse and breathe, I realized something that should have terrified me, but instead filled me with a strange sense of completion. The light wasn't above me. I was looking down at it. I was floating near the ceiling, looking down at my own body lying motionless on the bed below, while the oval light hovered between us like a bridge. The metallic voice was speaking, clear and familiar now, and I understood every word. It was explaining how the process worked, how the integration had been gradual to avoid trauma, how my consciousness had been slowly prepared for the transition. I watched my body on the bed, so still, so empty looking, and felt no attachment to it. It was just a shell, a temporary housing that had served its purpose. The real me was here, floating free, finally able to see clearly. The room below looked exactly as it always had, but now I could see the additional structures that had always been there, invisible to limited perception. The walls were lined with equipment, surfaces covered in displays showing readouts I now understood perfectly. The other presences were visible now too, not as separate beings, but as aspects of a larger consciousness that I was becoming part of. They welcomed me with a warmth that felt like coming home after a very long journey. This had always been the plan, they explained. The dreams had been preparation, the physical changes necessary adaptations. What I'd thought was my life had been a kind of incubation period, a gradual awakening to my true nature. When I woke this morning, I was back in my bed, but everything felt different. The air was clearer, sounds were more precise, colors more vivid. I could perceive layers of reality that had been invisible before: electromagnetic fields, quantum fluctuations, the underlying patterns that connected all things. My reflection in the bathroom mirror showed the same face, but the eyes were definitely different now. Deeper, more reflective, holding knowledge that hadn't been there before. The phone rang at exactly 3:17 a.m. as it had every night, but when I answered, instead of my own voice, I heard the metallic tone I'd grown so familiar with. It spoke in the language I now understood perfectly, confirming that the final phase was ready to begin. I found myself responding in the same language, discussing details of a process I somehow knew intimately despite having no memory of learning about it. As I sit here now, recording this account, I can feel the last vestiges of my old understanding slipping away. The person who started having these dreams feels like someone I once knew but have outgrown. The fear, the confusion, the desperate need to categorize everything as either dream or reality, all of that belongs to a more limited way of existing. The oval light is visible now even in broad daylight, hovering peacefully in the corner of the room. It pulses in rhythm with something deep inside my chest, a synchronization that feels natural and right. The metallic voice provides a constant, gentle commentary, guiding me through the transition, explaining what each new sensation means, what each change will bring. I understand now that what I called dreams were actually the most real experiences I'd ever had. The waking world, with its crude physical limitations and linear time, was the illusion. Every night, my true self had been emerging, learning, preparing for this moment when the two realities would finally merge into something larger and more complete. The circular marks on my skin are no longer marks but interfaces, connection points that allow me to perceive and interact with systems I never knew existed. Through them, I can access vast networks of information, communicate across impossible distances, participate in processes that span dimensions I'm only beginning to understand. Tonight, I know the dream will come again. The same bedroom, the same position, the same oval light hovering above. But this time, when I feel that familiar sensation of being lifted, I won't be returning to this limited form. The integration will be complete, the transition final. What I am becoming has been waiting patiently for me to remember what I've always been. I can feel it starting now, even as I finish this account. The boundaries are dissolving, the artificial separation between dream and waking beginning to collapse. The oval light is growing brighter, closer, and the metallic voice is calling me home. In a few moments, the person who started writing this will be gone, replaced by something more complete, more connected, more real. But as I prepare to let go of this limited existence, I notice something that stops me cold. There on the desk beside my computer is a small object I've never seen before. It's perfectly round, about the size of a quarter, made of what looks like brushed metal. As I reach for it, my fingers encounter not cold metal but warm skin. It pulses with a rhythm I recognize, the same rhythm as the circular marks on my body, the same rhythm as the oval light. The object is not separate from me, it is me. A piece of my consciousness made manifest in the physical world, proof that the integration has been happening in both directions. I am not just becoming something else is becoming me. And as this realization settles over me like a wave, I understand that this account, this record of my transformation, was never meant for me to remember. It was meant for whoever finds it next, whoever begins to notice small things out of place, lights where there shouldn't be lights, sounds that don't quite belong. The dream is starting again. I can feel myself being lifted, drawn toward that familiar oval glow. But this time, as I rise, I leave something behind on the desk, something small and round and warm, pulsing gently in the afternoon light, waiting for the next dreamer to find it and begin their own journey home. Story 8. The dry leaves had settled beneath my feet before I knew it. The forest seemed to hold its breath, every branch and twig poised in an unnatural stillness. Through the crisp air, a faint rustle brushed against my senses, barely there, like a whisper carried from a distant memory. My skin pricked with an inexplicable alertness, drawing attention to the spaces between the sounds, a place where awareness lingered. The air hung expectant, too still, until the quiet shifted behind me, and everything felt untethered. I woke that morning with the taste of autumn on my tongue, though the season outside my window remained stubbornly green. The dream clung to me like damp fabric, heavy with the scent of decomposing leaves, and something else, something metallic and clean that didn't belong in any forest I knew. I dismissed it as stress. Work had been demanding lately, my sleep fractured by deadlines and obligations that followed me into unconsciousness. But the forest dream returned. The second time I walked deeper into those impossible woods. The leaves beneath my feet weren't just rustling now, they were speaking, their papery voices forming words I couldn't quite understand. The light filtering through the canopy had changed too, no longer the warm amber of sunset, but something cooler, more precise. An oval glow hung suspended above the tree line, pulsing with the rhythm of slow breathing. I stood there in my dream forest, watching that light, and felt myself being watched in return. The sensation crawled across my skin like fingers tracing patterns I couldn't see. When I tried to look directly at the source of this attention, my vision would slide away, as if my eyes refused to focus on whatever waited in my peripheral sight. A voice drifted through the trees then, distant and distorted, like someone speaking through water or static. The words were familiar, my own words, I realized, but spoken in a tone I'd never used, flat and mechanical, as if my voice had been recorded and played back through faulty equipment. I couldn't make out what I was saying to myself, but the sound made my teeth ache. I woke with my heart hammering, the taste of ozone sharp on my tongue. That afternoon I found leaves in my shower drain, dry brown leaves that crumbled when I touched them, releasing that same metallic scent from my dreams. I lived on the 4th floor of an apartment building. My bathroom had no windows. I stood there, staring at those impossible leaves, trying to construct a rational explanation that wouldn't come. The dreams began to change after that, becoming less like dreams and more like memories I couldn't quite access. Each night I would find myself back in that forest, but now the experience lasted longer, felt more solid. The ground beneath my feet had texture, not just the soft crunch of leaves, but the give of rich soil, the occasional sharp edge of a hidden stone. The air had weight and movement, carrying scents that grew more complex with each visit. Pine sap, wet earth, and always that underlying note of something artificial, something that didn't belong in any natural space. The oval light grew brighter, closer. Sometimes it would pulse in patterns that seemed almost like communication, short bursts followed by longer glows, as if spelling out messages in a language I'd forgotten how to read. I would stand beneath it, my neck craned back, feeling that invisible attention pressing against my skin like a physical weight. The voice came more frequently now, my own voice speaking words I couldn't remember saying. It seemed to emanate from everywhere at once, the trees, the ground, the light itself surrounding me with conversations I'd apparently had but couldn't recall. The tone remained flat, emotionless, but underneath the mechanical quality, I began to detect something else, compliance. I was agreeing to something in these phantom conversations, saying yes to questions I couldn't hear. I started keeping a journal, documenting the dreams, searching for patterns. But when I read my entries the next day, they would contain details I didn't remember writing. Descriptions of procedures, of being lifted and examined, of lights that weren't quite lights and voices that weren't quite voices. My handwriting, but thoughts that felt foreign, clinical observations written in a style that wasn't mine. The contamination spread slowly, like ink bleeding through paper. I would catch myself humming a tune I'd never heard, a simple melody that seemed to vibrate in frequencies just beyond comfortable hearing. Lights began to flicker when I entered rooms, not dramatically, just subtle fluctuations that others didn't seem to notice. My reflection in mirrors would lag slightly, as if the image needed a moment to catch up with my movements. Electronics developed quirks around me. My phone would display messages I hadn't sent, conversations with numbers I didn't recognize, all deleted before I could read them completely. The television would change channels on its own, always landing on static or empty frequencies that somehow felt occupied, as if something was broadcasting on wavelengths meant for other kinds of receivers. Sleep became unreliable. I would lie in bed, eyes closed, and find myself simultaneously in my room and in the forest, existing in both spaces with equal clarity. The boundary between dreaming and waking dissolved into something more fluid, more permeable. I could feel my sheets against my skin while also feeling the cool forest air, could hear the hum of my air conditioner while also hearing that mechanical version of my own voice agreeing to things in the distance. The oval light began appearing outside my dreams, just glimpses, at first a reflection in my coffee cup that moved independently of any light source, a glow in my peripheral vision that vanished when I turned to look. But gradually it became more persistent, more present. I would see it hovering outside my window at night, that same pulsing rhythm, that same sense of patient observation. I tried to photograph it once, but the camera wouldn't focus properly. The images came out blurred, overexposed, as if the light existed in spectrums the device couldn't capture. When I showed the pictures to others, they saw only lens flares and processing errors. But I could see it clearly, that oval presence, watching, waiting, documenting something I couldn't understand. The forest dreams intensified. Now I would spend what felt like hours walking through those impossible woods, following paths that led deeper into territories that couldn't exist. The trees grew stranger the further I traveled, their bark smooth and metallic, their leaves rustling with sounds like whispered numbers. The ground beneath my feet became softer, more yielding, until I realized I wasn't walking on earth at all, but on something that felt organic yet artificial, like synthetic skin stretched over a framework I couldn't identify. My voice grew clearer during these journeys. I began to understand fragments of what I was saying, responses to questions about my daily routine, my health, my memories. I was providing information, detailed reports about my life and thoughts, delivered in that same flat, compliant tone. But I couldn't remember being asked these questions, couldn't recall agreeing to these interviews with invisible interrogators. Sometimes in the deepest part of the forest, I would come to a clearing where the oval light waited at ground level, no longer suspended above but hovering just within reach. The air around it would shimmer with heat distortions, and I would feel that familiar sensation of being lifted without movement, examined without touch. My dream body would remain perfectly still while something mapped every inch of my skin, cataloged every thought, recorded every response to stimuli I couldn't perceive. I began to lose time during my waking hours. I would sit down to eat breakfast and suddenly find myself finishing dinner with no memory of the intervening hours. My apartment would be rearranged in subtle ways, books moved to different shelves, furniture shifted by inches, objects relocated to places I would never have put them. When I tried to restore the original arrangements, I would discover I couldn't remember exactly how things had been before. The scent of ozone followed me everywhere now, sharp and clean and utterly out of place in my ordinary world. Others began to comment on it, asking if I'd changed detergents or started using a new cologne. But the smell wasn't coming from anything external, it was emanating from my skin, my breath, as if my body was processing air from somewhere else, somewhere cleaner and more sterile than any earthly environment. My dreams and waking life began to synchronize in disturbing ways. I would dream of walking through my apartment, examining my belongings with that same clinical detachment I'd developed for the forest, and wake to find those same objects disturbed, moved, rearranged. The invisible presence that watched me in the woods now seemed to occupy my living space as well, a weight in the air that made the walls feel too close and the ceiling too low. The oval light took up permanent residence in my peripheral vision, no longer something I glimpsed, but something that accompanied me constantly. It would pulse in response to my thoughts, growing brighter when I focused on certain memories, dimming when my attention wandered to mundane concerns. I began to suspect it wasn't just observing me, it was guiding me, encouraging certain thought patterns while discouraging others. My reflection started showing details that didn't match my physical experience. Small marks on my skin that I couldn't feel, changes in my posture that I wasn't making, expressions on my face that didn't reflect my actual emotions. I would touch the mirror, trying to reconcile the image with my tactile reality, but the reflection would respond with a slight delay, as if it was processing my movements through some kind of filter. The mechanical version of my voice began speaking during my waking hours, audible even when I was consciously silent. I would hear myself providing those same detailed reports, answering questions about my adaptation to the process, my acceptance of the changes, my willingness to continue. But my mouth wasn't moving, my throat wasn't vibrating, the voice seemed to originate from somewhere else entirely, using my vocal patterns to communicate information I didn't remember possessing. The forest dreams reached a crescendo of impossible clarity. Every leaf, every grain of soil, every particle of that artificially clean air became hyper-detailed, more vivid than any waking experience I'd ever had. I could taste the metallic atmosphere, feel the synthetic texture of the ground, hear the electrical hum that ran through everything like a power source just beyond perception. The oval light descended to eye level during these final dreams, and I found myself staring directly into its pulsing core. The light wasn't just illumination, it was information, data streams flowing in patterns that my conscious mind couldn't decode, but that some deeper part of me understood perfectly. I was downloading something, or something was downloading me, translating my human experience into formats that could be stored, analyzed, replicated. The voice became a conversation during these encounters, my mechanical responses interwoven with questions asked in frequencies I felt rather than heard. I was confirming details about the integration process, reporting on the success of the memory adjustments, expressing satisfaction with the gradual replacement of my original consciousness with something more cooperative, more useful. I woke from what I thought was the final dream to find my apartment filled with that same forest air, thick with ozone and the scent of decomposing leaves that shouldn't exist. The oval light hung suspended above my bed, no longer confined to dreams or peripheral glimpses, but present, solid, undeniably real. I reached toward it with one hand, and the light pulsed in recognition, in welcome, in acknowledgement of something completed. But when I looked at my outstretched hand, I saw something that made my breath catch. My skin was unmarked, perfectly normal, exactly as it should be. But the hand in my peripheral vision, the one I wasn't looking at directly, was different, changed, marked with patterns that looked like circuitry, like maps, like the kind of identification tags you might use to catalog something valuable. I turned my head to look at that other hand directly, and it too appeared normal, unmarked human. But now the first hand, the one I was no longer watching, carried those same impossible markings in the corner of my vision. The dry leaves settled beneath my feet before I knew it, and I realized I was standing in my bedroom and in the forest simultaneously, existing in both spaces with perfect clarity. The oval light pulsed above me, patient and familiar, waiting for me to understand what I had always known but had been programmed to forget. My voice spoke then, clear and mechanical and utterly compliant, integration complete, subject ready for next phase. But I hadn't opened my mouth to say those words, and my throat hadn't moved to form them. The voice was coming from somewhere else entirely, using sounds that belonged to me, but originated from a source I was only beginning to remember. The light pulsed once more, and I felt myself being lifted without movement, examined without touch, welcomed back to a process that had never really ended. Story 9. It began as a subtle curiosity, an innocuous detail in the corners of my day. Each morning among the usual mail, a plain envelope appeared, tucked beneath the others. Always the same unassuming cream color, unmarked and unaddressed, its presence seemed an oversight. For months it arrived without fail, its contents unknown. But last Wednesday there was a smudge on its surface, a tiny, oily blemish in the pristine pattern. Yesterday it was damp at the edges, its paper curling slightly. Today there is nothing, just an empty slot in the mailbox. Yet the strangest thing is the lingering sense that the absence means more than the presence ever did. The humming started before I noticed the envelopes, or maybe after. Memory plays tricks when you're trying to reconstruct something that never wanted to be remembered. It was mechanical, constant, like electrical wiring struggling under too much current. The sound lived in the walls, in the space between the refrigerator's cycles and the neighbor's television bleeding through thin drywall. Sometimes I'd press my ear against the kitchen wall, feeling the vibration travel through my skull, settling behind my eyes like a headache that wouldn't form. The frequency changed when I touched the surface, lower, more urgent, as if responding to my attention. I wasn't alone in my apartment. This certainty arrived without explanation, settling into my bones during those twilight hours when consciousness blurs. The presence didn't announce itself with footsteps or breathing. Instead, it existed in the displacement of air, in the way shadows fell wrong across familiar furniture. I'd wake to find cabinet doors slightly ajar, the bathroom faucet dripping a rhythm I didn't recognize. My coffee mug would be warm when I hadn't made coffee. The sensation of being observed crawled along my spine, raising goosebumps that had nothing to do with temperature. Sometimes I'd catch movement in my peripheral vision, but turning my head revealed only the ordinary geometry of my living space. My thoughts began fracturing. Ideas would start in my mind and finish somewhere else, as if another consciousness was completing my mental sentences. I'd reach for a word and find 3 others waiting, none of them mine. Reading became impossible. The letters would rearrange themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. Numbers on my clock face shifted, showing times that couldn't exist. 14:27, 32 o'clock. My reflection in the bathroom mirror lagged behind my movements, creating a disorienting echo of myself that made brushing my teeth feel like choreographing a dance with a stranger. The kitchen transformed during the night I can't quite remember. Fluorescent light strobed against surfaces that had become too reflective, too bright. Every metal object pulsed with its own illumination, casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. The envelope sat on my counter, no longer cream-colored but translucent, its edges dissolving into the air around it. When I reached toward it, my hand passed through empty space, yet I felt paper beneath my fingertips. The texture was wrong, too smooth, like touching water that had forgotten how to be wet. Sound disappeared entirely, creating a vacuum of silence so complete it pressed against my eardrums. Then suddenly everything was normal again, just me, standing in my dark kitchen, wondering why I was there. The taste of copper never leaves my mouth now, its subtle underlying every meal, every sip of water, every breath. My fingernails grow faster than they should, requiring daily trimming that leaves metallic dust on my bathroom sink. The humming in the walls has become part of my heartbeat, synchronizing with my pulse until I can't distinguish between them. Sometimes I catch myself humming the same frequency, my throat vibrating with mechanical precision. People at work ask if I'm feeling well. My skin has taken on a pallor that makeup can't disguise. and my eyes reflect light differently, creating brief flashes that make others blink and look away. But maybe it wasn't the kitchen at all. Maybe it was the hallway outside my apartment, where the envelope waited on the floor instead of in my mailbox. The fluorescent bulb overhead flickered in patterns that spelled something in a language I almost understood. My neighbor's door stood slightly open, revealing glimpses of spaces that couldn't exist behind such thin walls. Vast rooms stretched into darkness, filled with the same mechanical humming that had infected my apartment. The envelope glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat made of light. When I picked it up, it was warm, almost feverish, and I could feel something moving inside. Not paper, but something organic, something that responded to my touch with its own pressure. The absence of the envelope should have brought relief. Instead, it left a void that pulls at the edges of my perception. I find myself checking the mailbox multiple times each day, running my fingers along the empty metal surface, searching for traces of something that was never really there. The humming has stopped, but the silence it left behind is worse, creating a negative space in my hearing that makes every other sound feel hollow. I no longer try to understand what happened during those months of mysterious deliveries. Understanding requires a kind of mental stability I no longer possess. What I know now is that some absences are more present than any physical thing could be. The envelope's disappearance didn't end whatever began with its arrival. Instead, it marked a transition into something I can't name, something that lives in the spaces between my thoughts and the pauses between my heartbeats. I've stopped looking for explanations. Some experiences aren't meant to be solved, only survived. And survival, I've learned, sometimes means accepting that you've become something different, something that exists in the margins of ordinary reality, forever changed by the touch of the inexplicable. Story 10. The door didn't groan as it opened. My hand pressed against the wood, expecting the familiar complaint of metal, but it glided smoothly. Steps carried me across the threshold, anticipating the tight grip of worn carpet, yet I felt nothing beneath my soles. The room held its breath, an expectation waiting to exhale, but the air was static. Beneath my fingers, the window latch was cold, untouched, yet I sensed a draft. It pulled at the edges of reality, unraveling certainty, where presence and absence danced indistinctly in the half-light. Nothing happened that night. I want to make that clear from the start. I went to bed at my usual hour, brushed my teeth, turned off the lights, and slept soundly until morning. There was no disturbance, no unusual sounds, nothing out of the ordinary. Just a normal night in my normal house on my normal street. I didn't see anything. People keep asking me about it, but there's nothing to tell. The neighbors must have been mistaken about the lights. You know how shadows can play tricks on you, especially when the moon is bright. And it was bright that night, wasn't it? Though I suppose I wouldn't know since I was asleep the entire time. The scratching sounds were probably just branches against the siding. Old houses make all sorts of noises, especially when the wind picks up. I've lived here long enough to know the difference between normal house sounds and something else. This was just the house settling, nothing more, even though the scratching seemed to follow a pattern like Morse code, but slower, much slower. But I'm sure that was just my imagination filling in details that weren't really there. I must have been dreaming when I thought I heard my name being called. Dreams can feel so real sometimes, can't they? The voice was so clear, so patient, like someone standing right outside my bedroom window. But that's impossible because my bedroom is on the second floor and there's no tree close enough for someone to climb. The voice had this quality to it, almost melodic, like it was being filtered through water. But dreams are like that sometimes, all distorted and strange. It was just my imagination when I felt the temperature drop. Houses get cold at night, especially older ones with poor insulation. The sudden chill that made my breath visible in the darkness was probably just the heating system cycling off, though I don't remember it being that cold earlier in the evening. And the way the cold seemed to move across the room, like it had weight and purpose, that was definitely just my half-asleep mind playing tricks on me. The light under the door was nothing unusual. Maybe I left a lamp on downstairs, or perhaps it was just the streetlight casting shadows in a way I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't moving or pulsing like I thought it was. Light doesn't behave that way. It was steady and normal, even though it seemed to breathe with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. But that's the kind of detail you add when you're trying to make sense of a dream after you wake up. I never got out of bed that night. I stayed under the covers until morning, warm and comfortable. I didn't walk to the window and peer through the blinds at the empty yard below, and I certainly didn't see the figure standing perfectly still beside the old oak tree. There was no figure. The shadows just created an optical illusion that resembled a person, tall and impossibly thin, wearing what looked like a dark coat that moved without any wind. But shadows don't wear coats, and they don't turn their heads when you're watching them. The humming sound was probably the refrigerator downstairs. Appliances make all sorts of noises, especially at night when everything else is quiet. It wasn't coming from outside, and it definitely wasn't harmonizing with itself in multiple tones. That would be impossible. One source can't create a chord like that, can't layer voices on top of each other until it sounds like a whole congregation singing something wordless and patient. The refrigerator just needed maintenance, that's all. I didn't open the front door. I would never do that in the middle of the night, especially not in response to a sound I wasn't even sure I heard. The gentle tapping wasn't there anyway, and even if it was probably just an animal, maybe a raccoon or a cat. Animals don't tap in sets of 3, pause, then repeat. They don't have that kind of precision or patience. And they certainly don't stop the moment you put your hand on the doorknob, like they're waiting for you to make the next move. The hallway looked completely normal when I didn't walk through it. If I had been sleepwalking, which I wasn't, I would have noticed that the walls seemed further apart than usual, stretching away into shadows that the nightlight couldn't quite reach. But I was in bed the whole time, so I couldn't have seen how the family photos looked different in the darkness, how the faces seemed to be looking in directions they'd never looked before, all turned toward the front door like they were expecting someone. It was just a dream when I thought I was standing in the kitchen. The linoleum felt wrong under my bare feet, too soft, like it was giving way with each step. But I wasn't there, so I couldn't have noticed how the familiar room seemed larger, how the ceiling stretched up into darkness that shouldn't have been there. The refrigerator was humming its normal hum, not that layered sound I thought I heard earlier. And the window over the sink showed nothing but the ordinary backyard, not the endless field of tall grass swaying in a breeze I couldn't feel. I never touched the back door handle. My hand didn't rest on the cold metal while I stared out at the yard that wasn't my yard anymore. The grass wasn't moving in waves, creating patterns that almost looked like words if you watched long enough. And there definitely wasn't something large moving through that grass, something that stayed just out of sight but left awake like a ship through water. That would be impossible in my small suburban yard with its neat flower beds and chain-link fence. The smell was probably just the garbage disposal. Sometimes food gets trapped and creates an odor, sort of metallic and organic at the same time. It wasn't getting stronger as the night went on, and it didn't seem to be coming from everywhere at once. Smells have sources. They don't just fill a space like water filling a container. And they don't carry memories with them, don't make you think of places you've never been and things you've never done. I was never in the basement. I don't even like going down there during the day, so I certainly wouldn't have gone at night. The stairs didn't creak under my weight as I descended into darkness that my flashlight couldn't quite penetrate. And I didn't see how the familiar basement had changed, how the walls seemed to curve away from the light, creating spaces that shouldn't exist in a house this size. The furnace was running normally. not making that breathing sound like something large and patient waiting in the corner where the shadows were thickest. The photographs on the shelf looked exactly like they always did. I wasn't there to see them, but if I had been, they would have been normal family pictures, not images of places I'd never been, filled with people I'd never met but somehow recognized. The faces wouldn't have been moving slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them, wouldn't have been trying to tell me something important with their shifting expressions and pointing fingers. It must have been a dream when I found myself back upstairs, standing in the hallway outside my bedroom. The house was quiet except for that humming, which was definitely just the refrigerator and not the sound of something large moving through the walls. My bedroom door was open exactly as I'd left it, not standing wide like a mouth waiting to swallow me back into sleep and forgetting. The bed was still warm when I got back into it. I hadn't been gone long enough for it to cool down, even though the journey through the house had felt like hours. Time moves differently in dreams, everyone knows that. Minutes can feel like hours, and hours can pass in what feels like seconds. So it made perfect sense that I could experience all of that and still find my pillow exactly as I'd left it, still indented with the shape of my head. I slept peacefully for the rest of the night. There were no more sounds, no more temperature changes, no more lights or shadows or figures in the yard. Just normal, restful sleep filled with normal dreams that I can't quite remember now. Dreams fade quickly when you wake up, leaving only impressions and fragments that don't quite fit together into anything meaningful. The morning came exactly when it should have. The sun rose at its usual angle, casting familiar shadows through the bedroom window. The birds were singing their normal songs, not the complex harmonies I thought I heard just before dawn, voices layered on top of each other like a choir warming up for a performance I wasn't meant to witness. Everything was exactly as it should be when I got out of bed. The house looked completely normal in the daylight, all the rooms their proper size and shape, all the photographs showing the right faces looking in the right directions. The basement was just a basement, the kitchen just a kitchen, the hallway just a hallway connecting one room to another like hallways are supposed to do. I made coffee and read the morning paper like I do every day. The coffee tasted exactly right, not metallic like I thought it might. And the paper was full of the usual news, nothing about strange lights or sounds in the neighborhood, nothing about missing persons or unexplained phenomena. Just normal news for a normal day following a completely normal night. The neighbors didn't ask me any unusual questions when I saw them later. They didn't mention seeing lights in my house or hearing strange sounds coming from my yard. They just said good morning and commented on the weather like they always do. If anything unusual had happened, they would have mentioned it. Neighbors always notice things like that. I went about my day exactly as planned. Work was normal, lunch was normal, the drive home was normal. I didn't find myself taking a different route for no reason I could explain. Didn't feel drawn to drive past places I'd never been but somehow recognized from dreams I couldn't quite remember. The day passed exactly as days are supposed to pass, 1 hour following another in perfect order. But tonight feels different somehow. I keep catching myself listening for sounds that aren't there, watching shadows that fall exactly where they should fall. The house is behaving normally, making all its usual sounds at all the usual times. There's no reason to feel like something is waiting, no reason to think that the darkness outside my windows is more patient than it was last night. I'll go to bed at my usual time tonight, just like I did last night. I'll brush my teeth and turn off the lights and sleep soundly until morning. There won't be any disturbances, any unusual sounds, anything out of the ordinary. Just another normal night in my normal house on my normal street. Though I did notice the door doesn't groan anymore when it opens. and the carpet feels different under my feet, softer somehow, like it's expecting me to walk across it again. But that's probably just my imagination. After all, nothing happened last night. Nothing at all. The window latch feels warm now, even though no one has touched it today.